Well, welcome, and thank you everyone for tuning in from all around the world. This is Legitimately Funny, how to use humor in public speaking, in everyday life, and social media. My name is Daniel Gilman, and I'm so glad that you have tuned in. I'm the director and the founder for the Center for Public Speaking. We're a team of 10 coaches all around the world. We're in Spain, South Africa, Oxford, as well as here where I am, Niagara Falls, Canada. We're so thrilled that you're here because all of us, including myself, are going to be learning throughout the next 59 minutes about how we can use humor well. Our team of coaches is not only global, we're coaching global clients. We've coached more than 16 countries just this year, helping politicians prepare for question period. Professors become professors who not only enjoy lecturing now, but whose students also enjoy their lecturing. We've gone to work with business executives. Just this week, I was coaching one of the leaders in a leadership development program at Chick-fil-A, as well as people who are being coached for the boardroom or just communication for everyday life. Later, I'm going to pop back on and share with you how everyone tuning in is entitled. We're giving you as a free gift a one-on-one hour of coaching with our team members working with you. So stay on and we'll share how you can receive this gift. There's really nothing you got to do, but just book it in. I'm also going to let you know more details about the next monthly webinar, which is going to feature Professor Karen Swallow-Prior and Sam Albury together speaking on how to speak succinctly, something that you'll notice today I struggle with always. So I'm excited to learn them as well. Today is about humor. We're going to be giving away Joel Turner's book throughout the webinar. But before that, we're going to give away another book. These books we're giving away because our team is convinced that reading fresh books, old and new, help us as communicators and public speakers. And so this first book we're giving away is one that's helped me a lot in my communication. It's called Speak So Your Audience Will Listen. It has a lot of very practical tips, including some physical exercises that will help with your public speaking. And the winner is Michael Browning in Ottawa. You just won Speak So Your Audience Will Listen. We'll stay on and you're going to win more books throughout this time together. I'm not going to be emceeing today. Today we have a special treat. Our MC is another one of the coaches at the Center for Public Speaking. This is the pastor for women's ministries at Village Church, and she's also hugely involved in fighting human trafficking in Canada and throughout the world, providing help and restoration to survivors. And she's one of the most inspiring people that I know. I'm honored to call her colleague and to welcome her as our MC. Please give a warm digital welcome to Anne Miranda.
Thanks, Daniel. It's so good to be here. Look, you gave away a book. I want to give away a book too. That's an incredible book, The Speak So Your Audience Would Listen, because we all want our audience to listen. So Kingsley in Toronto, we are going to give you a book. Surprise! This is legitimately funny. So welcome. We have two hilarious guests today. Each will speak for about 12 minutes, and then we'll have a 25-minute conversation Q&A with them. So when you have your question, pop it in the Q&A box, and I'll get to that and ask them those questions later on in our time together. But first, before we get started, I wanted to thank Word Made Digital. They are sponsoring our webinar today, and my friend Joanna LaFleur, oh my goodness, she is amazing. Her team at Word Made Digital are all about helping you communicate the best news in the world through a communication strategy and tools that are ready for this digital world. And we can confess we need to know more about how to communicate in this world that we are living in, especially in the digital world. And so check out her free resources. Just go to Word Made Digital podcast or her webpage. She's got interviews. She's got an interview with today's speaker, Andy Bannister, and dozens of other excellent communicators. It is absolutely incredible. Her tutorial videos have helped me in my personal ministry, and she's all about equipping you as a communicator. Plus, they can even help you build your website and social media strategy and build you a stunning new website in a week. And so, Andy, I'm going to introduce you. And Dr. Andy Bannister is a global speaker. Made me laugh so hard this morning already. I cannot wait for you to lean into this conversation. He is the author of many excellent books. He's written brilliant forewords of so many other books, including Joel Turner's Humor Me book. Andy is an adjunct research fellow at Melbourne School of Theology in Australia and is adjunct faculty at Wycliffe College, the University of Toronto as well. And most relevant to today's topic, though he speaks on so many serious topics, he's known for being fun and hilarious. And he joins us today from Scotland. Welcome, Andy.
And it's great to be with you, and great to be with all of you today. Admittedly, only in pixelated form, but nevertheless, looking forward to our time together. Well, the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw once remarked that he said the biggest problem when it comes to communication, the single biggest problem when it comes to communication, is the illusion that it's taken place. And I think whether you are listening today, whether you're tuning in and you are a business leader or an educator or you're a preacher, we can assume, I think, that, because we have shared our idea, because we've shared our concept, because we've shared our lesson plan or our sermon, we can easily drift into assuming that the audience has received and understood it. It's very easy to sort of naively assume, well, I communicated, therefore the job is done. Well, hopefully, the fact that maybe you are listening to this webinar today is a clue that maybe you've realized that actually it ain't quite as simple as that. It isn't just as simple as communicating, the content. We need to go a little bit deeper than that. And, one lesson that I have learned over the years, both personally, I've learned it the hard way, but also I've learned it from watching thousands and thousands of other speakers, is that if you have excellent material, but poor communication skills, you will have minimal impact. By contrast, you can have average material, but brilliant communication skills or above average communication skills, and that will give you a much, much greater impact. And so really what we need to learn, I think, is we need to be realizing that we need to give as much thought to how we communicate as to what we communicate. We need to give as much thought to how you communicate a message as to what you communicate, which is going to bring us via a slightly roundabout route to the whole question of humor that we're looking at in this webinar today. Well, some 2,500 years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle, not particularly known as a stand-up comic, but maybe who knows what he did on the side, he wrote a very famous treatise called On Rhetoric, and that was on the art of communication. And in that little booklet that he wrote, he famously noted that there are in fact three aspects to speaking well. We need to think about what he called logos, we need to think about ethos, and we need to think about pathos. Now, logos, the first of those, is pretty straightforward. That's the kind of intellectual content of what we say when we communicate a message to an audience. Then there's the character of the speaker. That's ethos. When you speak, are you a warm, are you an engaging person that your audience is drawn to, or are you somebody who's very sort of frosty and puts people off? Ethos is very important. And then lastly, Aristotle identified pathos. That's the emotional appeal of what you have to say. Now, see, here the thing is that I suspect most of you on this call probably have logos licked. You have it nailed down. After all, you wouldn't be doing the job that you're doing unless you had some expertise, right? Otherwise, you'd be a social media influencer or something. And most of you on this call, I suspect, probably rate fairly high on ethos. Ethos is a fairly easy one to get right. I learned pretty early on in my career that kind of biting members of the audience or throwing things at them didn't really work. And of course, I also have a British accent, which does kind of get you slightly ahead of the game on ethos. Somebody once said to me, Andy, you could say anything in that accent and I would take it seriously. I thought afterwards that might not actually be a compliment, but there you go. But then there's pathos. Pathos is the last of the three, and pathos is crucial, actually, that emotional appeal, because I'd argue that's where an awful lot of connection with the audience happens. And you can make that emotional connection with the audience, I think, largely, actually, in two ways. You can do it through telling stories, or you can do it, as we're going to be talking about this evening, through the use of humor. And whether you use stories or whether you use humor to kind of build the emotional connection with the audience, in either way, you're doing the same thing. You're actually appealing to imagination. I first realized how important it is to appeal to imagination when I watched Steve Jobs, the then CEO of Apple Computer, launch the iPhone back in 2007. Remember those heady days in the dim and distant past. And if you haven't watched that product launch, it's worth digging up on YouTube and having a watch, because it's an amazing example of communicating using the power of pathos. Because for 45 minutes, Steve doesn't really tell you much in terms of technical detail. Rather, he excites your imagination, and he actually makes you think that this device is going to revolutionize your life. I often thought that Steve perhaps missed a vocation as a preacher. You see, appealing to the audience, whether through imagination or whether through stories or humor rather, that builds that connection of pathos with your audience. And it means that whatever content you then deliver is going to be much better received, but also most importantly, remembered. Because you just see, the thing is, as human beings, we tend to remember story and we tend to remember humor far more than we do content. You know, I don't remember almost anything about that webinar I went to on time management 4 years ago, but I remember that story from 8 years ago about Joel's mishap involving the yak, the tub of yogurt, and the roller skates. In fact, I'm sure if you ask him, he'll tell you the story. As communicators, we neglect pathos at our peril. And one of my favorite communicators and writers particularly was C.S. Lewis, the former atheist turned Christian philosopher, whose books have inspired millions. And when Lewis was asked why he moved from writing more straightforward philosophy to writing novels like the Narnia books and the Cosmic Trilogy, Lewis replied that he found that the front door of people's minds is often guarded by, as he put it, watchful dragons that prevent people sort of accepting truth or a message through the front door. But, said Lewis, he said, if we use story and if we appeal to the imagination, we can steal past the watchful dragons that stop people thinking about, well, in his case, the big questions of life. And we can get, as it were, part through the side door rather than through the front door. But I often wondered, actually, if stories are one way of getting past watchful dragons, I think there's another way as well. I think humor can get us past those watchful dragons. We can maybe, as it were, you know, tickle the dragon under the nose, and while it's rolling on its back, laughing, waving its legs in the air, we can charge through the front door with our message. So that's a bit of background as to why I think humor really matters. And so maybe now you're asking, well, okay, that's helpful. I get all that, Andy. How can I become legitimately funny? Which admittedly is a much better question than how can I be illegitimately funny? Well, in a few minutes, Joel's going to share some insights from his work as a professional comedian. Before you get me, I'm an unprofessional comedian. But there are a few principles that I've worked out over the years of speaking and writing of how I've woven comedy into my own speaking and communicating, and hopefully had more of an impact. Let me share those with you, and then I shall pass the baton to Joel. So 8 things that we can think about in terms of our communication, just very briefly. Principle number 1 is a simple one. Think about how you're normally funny. How do you make people laugh in real life? Are you someone who can tell a cracking story? Do you make absolutely excruciating puns? Are you the king of dad jokes? In other words, what's your natural style? And the reason you want to think about this is you don't want to try and be something that you're not. So maybe you should take a really big risk and ask your kids or your spouse or a friend who knows you well, you know, what is it about you that, if anything, is naturally funny? Secondly, you can learn to be self-deprecating. You know, the original subtitle of this webinar was how not to be cruel in using humor. And the best way to avoid, you know, upsetting people, causing offense, or actually being cruel, either deliberately or accidentally, is to tell stories or comments about yourself. Use yourself as the butt of your humor. I think the Brits, actually, I have to say, I think we can teach the world on this, because we are so naturally good at this, because as Brits, we are naturally modest and misunderstood. Thirdly, remember that a little goes a long way. You know, use humor as the seasoning throughout your piece of communication, you know, particularly for those of you who are more perhaps naturally gifted at being funny, and there'll be a range of skills in this audience. You know, you can let the humor take over. Don't do that. Always remember you are there to communicate something else. Use humor to bring a little spice to the proceedings. Don't make it the main course. Fourthly, don't worry if things go wrong at first, as they probably will if you start experimenting in perhaps you know, weaving a bit of humor into your talks and your communication. Be willing to put the hard work in, because, you know, many of us are logos focused. We tend to put the hard work in there. You know, we like to get the content right, but make sure you put equal amounts of effort when you're preparing a piece of communication into the pathos and into, in this case, the humor. You know, practice, debrief afterwards. Listen to videos or recordings back of what you've done. Get feedback from friends whose opinion you value and whose opinion you trust. And you will, with practice, get better, even if things go a bit, roughly at first. Fifthly, learn from others. I teach a lot of trainee pastors, and I often get funny looks when I tell them that the first thing, one of the main things they should do is actually go and watch a shed load of TED Talks and lots of stand-up comedians, as well as watch excellent preachers. If you want to learn to be funnier, invest time in watching those who are great communicators. And when you find something funny, try and reflect a little bit. Don't just laugh out loud. Stop and think, okay, why did I laugh? What was what that guy or girl did in that talk? What was funny? What can I learn from that? One of the super helpful things about Joel's book, which he's kindly giving away to you, I think, as part of this the proceedings, is that it helps you learn how to analyze humor a bit. And as you analyze it, you can figure out how it works. Sixthly, borrow. Within reason, don't be afraid to borrow good material. Just give credit where you do. For example, like the standard out that I use when I tell a joke on stage in a talk and it goes badly wrong is an idea I got from a British stand-up comedian called Eddie Izzard. If I tell a joke and no one laughs, I just do a little mime and say, no, don't ever tell that story ever again. And the audience instantly laugh at that. It's a great get out. I nicked it from Eddie Izzard, and if anyone asks, I always give him credit. Borrow good material and credit those you've taken it from. Seventh, practice out loud. I read everything that I do out loud. I've been communicating for years, but my talk scripts, my book chapters, everything I read out loud as I practice it, because then it's easier to see what's funny or what falls flat when you hear it. So do that, practice your material. Doing that over the years, by the way, means I am now 27% funnier than I was 10 years ago. Although, of course, as we know, 47% of all statistics are made up on the spot. And then lastly, finally think about when to use humor. Use it carefully and wisely. Somebody once said, what's the difference between a good joke and a bad joke timing? Now, that's not just a question of the internal timing of a joke. It's also a question of when in a talk or lecture to use it. People will often expect someone who's trying to be funny to throw a gag in at the start. Maybe don't do that. Maybe save a little bit of humor for a key point, just when you want people to take attention. Tell a joke to maybe break the ice, and then you can slip the truth in underneath. Or as you rehearse your talk, notice when things are getting a bit heavier and maybe use humor to lighten the mood. Well, I realize by 12 minutes, I've only had a chance to just briefly scratch the surface. So I hope some of what I've shared has been helpful to you. And thank you for listening so attentively. And I have to say, of all the audiences that I have ever addressed, you have been by far the most recent.
Thank you, Andy. This is absolutely wonderful. I've been jotting notes like crazy. Questions are coming in. So just a reminder to add your questions to the Q&A box or drop them in the chat, and I'll be able to ask Joel and Andy afterwards in our dialogue. Joel, turn on your camera, unmute. Joel is a former stand-up comedian, now pastor, speaker, author on the book that we keep on referencing, Humor Me. Hey, Joel.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
So good, so good, and so good. Your book's the inspiration for today's webinar, and we're gonna give this book away right now to Rita from Ottawa. Rita from Ottawa, you win the book. Joel, thank you so much for being with us. Welcome. Take it away.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. Thanks so much, Anne. Guys, yeah, my name is Joel Turner. I was super excited to get this invite. I got my hair permed just for you guys. I hope you noticed it. It just finished this morning, but I want to tell you a bit about myself, give you some background, and then kind of dive into some practical things as well. In the late 90s, I was running a comedy club in Western Canada, not a Christian, dating a Mormon girlfriend, was going to get married. And then she dumped me. It was kind of hurts not hearing an awe or never mind. Anyway, so I basically just hit rock bottom. Walked into a church service and sat at the back and was this ball of mess and a wreck, and I ended up giving my life to Jesus. That's my story. So I don't know if you're watching this and you're like, well, I don't really know Jesus. I'm checking out church faith or Jesus, but that changed my whole life around. And weird story, but I walked back into the comedy club, had about 20 comedians working for me. I called a staff meeting. I said, look, I just became a Christian. We should all become Christians right now, which is pretty much the fastest way to kill a comedy club. I could write a book on how to kill a comedy club in 3 months. Took out all the alcohol, smoking, swearing, changed the price from $16 to $3, started teaching near swears to non-Christian comedians. And about this time, WestJet Airlines, who, if you're watching this from anywhere else in the world, kind of the second largest airline in Canada, they were just starting up, and they said, hey, let's hire this guy to be the first airline to hire a full-time comedian to train comedy to pilots, flight attendants, customer service agents. So it's kind of a crazy job and a crazy transformation. I just become a Christian. I'm running this comedy club and dealing with all that. And then I start training how to sort of defuse situations. This is before 9/11. And I'm working with this massive airline. And at the time, I start going to church. And so I walk into a church in Vancouver, and I take 2 comedians with me. One guy who's kind of just checking out God, church, and faith, and the other one who'd become a Christian. And I walked in, and we walked in, and as the preacher got up, he did an opening joke. And at the end of his joke, we all looked at each other, and in unison, we said, he just broke the rule of 3s. Now, I know the big question on everyone's mind watching right now is, what's the rule of 3s? Well, I'll get to that later. But in the time that remains, I want us to try and accomplish one small thing if we can. And it's this: every person can improve in humor by understanding 3 things. What makes something funny? Can we improve our own humor? And why does this matter? So let's start with what makes something funny. Let's start with a joke. Now, it's not my joke. That way you can't judge me if you don't like it. Humor is pretty subjective, I tell people. So what works for someone doesn't work for someone else. But I don't know if, show of hands, anybody heard of the comedian? Doesn't really do much stuff these days, called Stephen Wright. Back in the day, dry sense of humor, deadpan face, and he would deliver these lines that really made you think and kind of messed with your mind. Well, here's a couple of his one-liners, and let's see if you think they're funny and why they're funny. So Stephen Wright said this: if at first, well, here's how he would say it. Let me help you a little bit. He'd be like, if at first you don't succeed, then skydiving definitely isn't for you. Or how about this one? I think it's wrong that only one company makes Monopoly. Or how about this one? I don't know whether you're laughing at these, because this is the best. Like Andy said, it's the best, the zero audience response, but please tell me someone's enjoying this. How about this one? Here's another one. I like this one. He goes, one Christmas, I got a humidifier and a dehumidifier. I put them in the same room and let them fight it out. I love that one. What is it, though? I don't know if any of those caught you, but I want to deal with this idea of what is it that makes us laugh. Years ago, RZIM hired me to teach this. That's where I met Andy, to their speakers, their traveling speakers and their students in about 200 of them in Vancouver. And they were wanting to help use humor to connect with people. So I told them this theory I had of what makes something funny. And it's like this: write it down. Other side. Seriously, if you got a pen, jot that down. I believe this will change the way you look at humor forever. It's my own theory, and it goes like this: what makes us laugh is the other side of what the audience expects. It's what surprises us. It's what catches us off guard. Now, you won't watch comedy or TV or movies, or even when someone tells a joke or says something that people laugh at in the office, you won't hear it the same once you understand other side. It's let's take the first joke and break it down for a second. You're familiar with the term, if at first you don't succeed. It's kind of familiar to your brain. It's trained for you to expect the last part. So when someone starts a sentence with, yeah, you know what they say, if at first you don't succeed, in your mind, you're ready to say, try again, right? But what you don't expect is a different ending. Then it's as if the comedian knows this and says, now let's heighten the unexpected. And I talk about that in my book. So he knows that you're expecting one ending. He heightens it, exaggerates, and thus he picks skydiving, a high-risk thing that cannot even or ever be failed even once. And now we have this thing in comedy called the pain in comedy, the truth in comedy, and it's heightened to where we laugh. It's the other side of what we expected. So that's what makes something, that's an understanding on comedy that really will improve your comedy understanding like 40%. Just throwing out a number there. That's what makes something funny. And again, I don't think you'll see things the same ever again once you understand that. And it helps you understand how to improve that. So what are some ways to improve humor? Well, it's great that, Andy used 8 examples of ways to improve. 7 were from my book, but that doesn't matter. The point is this. What are some ways? I'm just having fun. He's an awesome guy. What are some ways to improve humor? I'm only going to give you one, because really it's to just dive deep into one, I think, is a lot better than giving you like 40 that I talk about in the book. So let's just deal with the rule of 3, since I use that as an example the first time I walked into a church. The rule of 3s is known as the comic triple in the world of comedy. It's fairly easy to get, and try it as well. And it goes like this: when using humor or making a joke, 1 is not enough, neither is 2, but 4 is right out, or way out, if you will, or too far. What does that mean, Joel? Well, comedy usually goes in 3s. So think about it. When you hear a good joke, you often hear it in 3s. Example, I like Coca-Cola, classical music, and world domination. Did you see the other side? The rule of 3s creates an assumption that by listing 2 similar items, then the third one differs in a fundamental way, and thereby creating or taking you to the other side, you could say. So see, by adding classical music to my joke, it just reinforces that we're talking about non-offensive items that we like. So the expectation of the audience is that the next thing is going to be non-offensive, something that they like. So when I drop global domination in there, it's heightened in its nature and produces a bigger laugh. Take a look at the same joke with the third being like the first 2. If you say, I like Coca-Cola, classical music, and sports, everybody goes, boring. Do you see why? What if I did 4? I like Coca-Cola, classical music, global world domination, and eating teddy bears. It's just unnecessary, right? It's too much. But you'd be surprised how many people abuse this rule. And again, my heart has always been, look, I don't think that my course on humor needs to be in a seminary or anything like that. It's more like, since everybody's using humor and humor is a great tool to connect, maybe there's things that we can do to improve upon that humor. So every Sunday, I tell you right now, someone somewhere has no idea why their 4th line didn't fly or their 2nd line wasn't enough. But from the world of comedy, we would go, well, it's the rule of 3s, of course. All right, so third thing I want to say just quickly is, why does all this matter? Consider for a moment the people you're drawn to. Are they miserable or are they fun? Are they boring or funny? Are they glass half full or people really that are nailing depression? Because here's the thing. When someone who's a non-believer in Jesus meets a believer in Jesus, and that believer is down, drab, miserable, do you think at any point they go, man, I just want what he has? I don't think so. I don't think that's what draws them. It didn't draw me when I was a non-Christian comedian. And the Bible says on Jesus that he was full of joy. The Bible says in his presence is the fullness of joy. And so I would say nothing draws people to Jesus more than the joy of the Lord. Not to mention, the Bible says the joy of the Lord is our strength. So that's just for me. You might be watching this going, well, I'm not really a Christian. And, I'm not really I'm just checking out God faith, and I'm trying to just more improve my speaking. And that's fine. I'm just encouraging you at the principle of who I am and my whole life and ministry is this concept that Jesus produces a joy, even that goes beyond just making people laugh and humor. And so I want to present that. And if we're, if we're not adding actual one-liners and humor, even if we're adding joy, we're ministering to people. There's a verse in the Bible in the book of Proverbs 17, verse 22, that says, a cheerful heart is good medicine. So I'll leave you with this. I translate that verse like this: God loves to laugh. Laughter's healthy for us. It's like medicine. So start with yourself by answering this question. Have you taken your medicine lately? Have you taken your medicine today? Because again, in a hopeless world, people are not looking, especially right now, with all this going on, they're not looking for others of us to be down and depressing. They're looking for joy, and it's found in one place, in Jesus. That's why this matters, because comedy connects. Comedy says it's all right in the big picture of things. This life is not the main event. Comedy breaks down walls, and humor is a big uplook to the one who's on the throne. I hope that helps you guys.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
I can't wait to read your book. Full confession, I just found out that you have a book and I want to read it. So I'm also going to share it with someone else. It's all about, and you and somebody else is going to get that book. And today it is Taco Bampopta. That book is yours. You will be receiving that book in the mail. Joel, thanks so much. This is awesome. I have
so good.
A ton of questions. Andy, join us on the screen. We are going to, I'm just going to kind of put you guys in the hot seat, and you can both answer these questions. Some of them are directed specifically to one of you over the other, so I will let you know who. But this is a very interesting one that came in. So much of communication today is digital. It's impossible to know tone of voice when it's a social media post. So what advice do you have for being funny on social media?
Well, that's a really difficult question. That's a really difficult question. So I really just feel that Andy should answer that. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Joe. That's a really good question. And as someone who hangs out a lot on kind of social media, it's one I've wrestled with a lot. So there are two dangers here. One is that you can try and be a bit too edgy, and you can't read the audience in a way that you can if you're in front of it. When Joel or I, would sort of do our various style of things, Joel, you would say, right, you can read an audience, right? Probably how far you could push something. So social media, you can't, and then things get retweeted and reshared. So the danger is you can be a bit too edgy and get in trouble. The other danger is you get just boringly bland. So I'd say a couple of things. I think firstly, practice gently. Start softly, and then sort of see how things work. Look at what others are doing. So whatever field you're in, whether you're a Christian speaker, or you're a business leader, politician, whatever, see what your peers are doing and see what engagement they're getting. And then the last thing I think I would say is don't read the comments. Social media can be a hostile place. People just pile on and hate people, and one way of avoiding that is don't read the comments, because the thing is, there's a pride thing. You're all from different backgrounds on this call, but for those of you who are Christians on this call, pride is one of the things that the Bible warns about a lot. And looking at how many likes I've got, if people are saying nice things about me, I mean, that's a surefire way to sort of getting very full of yourself. So don't. That way you don't feel horrible if somebody says, well, that wasn't funny, you sad old whatever. And you don't get puffed up if you've done the funniest tweet, since Twitter began. So yeah, stay away from reading the comments too much.
I know.
Joel, you got anything to that?
Sorry.
I literally have nothing to add, because I thought that was really definitive and brilliant. So, and I'm probably going to say that a lot. I have a lot of respect for Andy, but no, I think it's a great point.
There are some social media platforms where you can actually turn off the comments. So I love that piece that you added there, Andy. Joel, this question is for you. Can't run away from this one. Okay, you are the man.
Is it my mom? Is it my mom again? Hi, Mom. I knew you'd find me. Oh, not my mom. Okay, sorry, guys. Sorry.
You wrote the book on humor. And both of you speakers are known for being absolutely hilarious. So do you feel pressure to always be on and always be funny? And if so, then how do you cope with that?
So I would say, because I started out running a comedy club and actually training comedians, that in the early days, I definitely felt a pressure, and all comedians do. It's really funny in the early days, because when people would send or recommend a comedian to audition for my comedy club in Western Canada, they would always say the same line. They'd go, Joel, this guy is the funniest guy you'll ever meet, right? But there's a difference between stage funny and funny hanging out with your friends. And so I think when you're around comedians all the time, we all know that we turn it on or off, and anyone who says differently is not telling the truth. But there are naturally funny people. So for me, I don't feel any pressure to turn it on or off anymore. What I feel is like something like this, I felt a bit of pressure, not to be funny, but I was trying to understand the audience and go, okay, these guys need more equipping. So I'm actually going to tone it down a bit on comedy. have fun with it, but I want to equip them because I don't want to waste their time. And it sounds like a crowd of professionals looking to improve their speaking. So I think, how do you turn it on or off? Know your audience. If you're trying to do, like I did a stand-up show in Edmonton not too long ago. Well, it's at there. Hey, we want to hire you, man. Can you come and do a stand-up show? Well, okay. What else do you have lined up? Just you, an hour, people are paying money. Well, I'm not good. So I didn't start off and go, let's talk about your struggles as a group. No, it was like, I'm going to just go full on, pick my funniest jokes, my funniest stories, very self-deprecating humor, make it, the goal to get interacting with the audience, people crying with laughter, and have them all go home. And that's all it was. There's no sermon. So I think knowing your audience really helps, but also just maturely knowing yourself and being mature enough to go, I don't have to joke in this situation. It's a turn on or turn off, if that makes sense, for sure.
Andy, how do you reply to that one?
Yeah, no, I think Joel's pretty much covered it. I mean, I think, again, it ties in partly to the previous one, really. I suppose that I answered. I would partly ask the question to whoever asked that: why do you feel the need to, or if you feel the need to always be funny, what's the underlying issue there? Why do you feel that need? Because I think one of the dangers, if you are funny, either for a living or as part of what you do, you can use it to draw the attention to yourself. And that's fine when you're on the stage. The attention should be coming your way. You're the speaker and the presenter. If you're a crowd of mates, at the restaurant or whatever, and you somehow feel the need to be the funniest guy or girl in the room, I would say maybe you just need to learn to shut the flip up and let people who are not so funny have a hand up. And there's also something about when you're a public speaker and you've got good at this. Maybe some of you watching this are really good at this stuff. I've been doing it for longer than Joel and I have. There's something about how do you offer a hand up to others? Maybe just pipe down, look for the ones who are a bit quieter and send some attention their way. It's a real gift
when you do that.
Someone who can bring attention, you can direct it to others.
Do you think?
That's why I love working with you, bro. I just love it when you care for people like that. So good to see your heart. Oh, is this still? Am I being recorded? Sorry.
You are, mate. I love the onion trick.
I
Works every time, doesn't it, Joel? The onion every time.
Every single time.
As actually mentioned, the next one other question is: do you think that it's an avoidance of emotion sometimes, where people use humor?
Well, sure. I mean, we used to have this joke when we auditioned comedians. We knew three things about them. One, they all had an angry father. Two, I don't know why. It just happens, you guys. Two, usually they were insecure and trying to prove themselves, which can be a good thing in an audition. And three, hopefully they liked Monty Python, or we wouldn't give them a second audition. That's not related to the first two.
Okay. Well, there's actually another question about anger. Can anger be turned into humor? And how can you translate frustration into comic relief?
Another great question. Go for it, Andy. It is a great question. And the fascinating thing is, I'm picking up on something that Joel said. Someone who I love stand-up comedy. I don't do it, but I love watching it. Learned a lot from it. Talked to lots of friends over the years who are comedians and know sort of one or two folks on the circuit. There is something, actually, I think some of the best comedians, there is that either that hurt or that anger deep down, because you need to be driven somewhere, and it needs to be driven from somewhere. And I think that's okay. I don't think there's a problem in doing that, as long as you're not using humor to hide from it and not deal with it. I think a great question you can ask whenever you want to engage in humor, whether it's driven by tragedy, or whether it's driven by humor, driven by anger, whatever it is, what's the end that you are trying to achieve? If something terrible has happened to you, and you want to ensure the terrible thing doesn't happen to other people, that's fine. That's a great and valid use. If you're using anger to try and get revenge or score points, or somehow, you've got to be careful as to what you're using humor for. This actually ties back to the early question you asked me, and on the online stuff, that I think it's a great question when we tweet. Actually, we should be asking the question, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to, bring others down? Are we trying to draw attention to ourselves? Are we trying to whatever? So to always try and be that little bit self-critical and self-reflective. But that aside, there's nothing wrong with using anger. I mean, you look at Jesus and the Gospels, it's often neglected, actually, the fact there's lots of humor in the Bible. And when Jesus, has a go at the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, for what they were doing in terms of using religion to keep people sort of entrapped. He's funny. Some of the lines he comes out with are quite funny. We miss some of the humor because we don't get the cultural references. So Jesus used humor and used it for a righteous end. So I think that's the question. What's the end that you're aiming at?
There's so many questions, guys. There's so many questions. My goodness. Okay, listen to this stuff. A lot of our attendees, including myself, are advocates for the most vulnerable and abused. Do you have any advice on how to speak about a heavy or difficult topic and still incorporate humor? So like raising awareness about injustices, raising funds to help in tragedies and disasters, that kind of thing. How do we use humor in those circles?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have specifics as far as like, oh, I'm going to bridge the gap to some book or resource. But first of all, I love the line of questioning, the fact that we care to go beyond the joke to the heart of the person, what it's all about. And I do remember a story, though, of a lady that came up after I was speaking somewhere. And I used a fair bit of humor and a fair bit of apologetics. And she came up and she hated the idea that Christianity was so narrow, that it was just, one way to God. Well, I could see by her whole approach that she had been burnt somewhere along the line. So I said, hey, do you have kids? She goes, yeah, I got a kid. I said, have you ever had one of your kids go down the road to a neighbor's house or a friend's house? Yeah. You remember the first time you did it, you gave instructions on how to get back, and it was like one way. You wanted it really clear. And she's kind of laughing along with me. And I'm like, right, you don't tell them like drive to Edmonton, take a U-turn, come back to, it's your child. You just want them to have one way to get there. She goes, yeah, I get it. And the walls came down, and then I was able to tell her, well, that's how God is with us when he says, no one comes to the Father but through me. He's a loving, caring Father that gives you one clear way so you don't mess it up. So it went from the humor, even though I could tell she was hurting, she'd shared some things, how she'd been hurt, both outside of the church and inside of the church. And this bridged a way to just bring the walls down, relate with her, and then point her to a God that really cares about her. I hope that helps a little bit.
So good. Hey, Andy, who organizes their bookshelf better, you or Joel?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's interesting that, if people remember at the start when Daniel was doing his introduction, I mean, Joel and I were wondering whether that's a real bookshelf he's got there, or that's
his is fake.
Yeah. My theory in life, well, look, that's very impressive. My theory,
but yours is messy, bro. Look at
anyone who's got
messy.
Time to organize their bookshelf clearly has got too much time and should be doing something better. That's what I say.
Wow.
How do you mind chaotic bookshelf?
Here we go. Next question.
It's moving right up.
I'm still upset about the last one. Okay, let's move on.
Different.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, messiness is a side of use.
They commented in the chat that messiness means you actually use your books. They're not just
there. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, busted. I haven't read any of these.
Great chat there. All right, we've got different audiences from different cultures, different ages, etc. That obviously have different concepts on what is funny. So how do you adjust your humor based on your audience and still be genuine? Sure.
Great question. Since Andy dealt with the theological question about the bookshelves, I'll take this one. I think it's a great question. I mean, there's many aspects of this. The first one is comedy is subjective, meaning what? I picked a guy, Stephen Wright, a joke in the little talk that I did. I mean, that doesn't mean everybody on here thought it was funny, so I'm trying to pick a far-reaching style that makes people laugh. But the reality is, as the writer or as the person asking the question is, it's subjective. So it really is based on the person. And it's really important that you know your audience. That's massive before speaking. That's just huge. And I do talk about this quite a bit in the book. How can you develop your humor, and how can you base it on the audience, and how can you keep it genuine, just to answer that. But knowing your audience is huge. If you're going to do like when I would do a comedy show I did once for 500 nurses. Oh my goodness. That's like, okay, wow. You're not worried about you saying anything inappropriate. It's what they yell from the audience. So that's way different than a pastor's conference. You know what I mean? Or a memorial service. So you really have to know your audience. That's just a huge thing. But I do, as far as the second part of the question, I do deal with concepts of comedy and how you can develop. And there's 21 ways to do that. Always 21. It sounds better than 20. So
I love the fact that if you put a specific number on something, people always think it's like there's research behind it. There are the 17
Totally.
The other great, just to add a couple of things, I say one of the great things is I've learned over the years, if you mess up and get it really badly wrong, the great thing is you'll never get invited back to that kind of audience again. So it ends up
Yes,
sort of
that happened
self-selecting
when you were at my church.
in the end. But what I would say, particularly with different audiences, different cultural backgrounds, firstly, you know, one, I mean, hopefully this goes without saying, but, you know, don't make fun of someone else's culture. You can make fun of your own, though. You know, I would never dream of telling jokes about somebody else's culture, but I'll have some fun at the expense of the Brits, because I am one. So have some fun with your own culture. Secondly, of course, there are some pretty much human universals as well. There's great themes that turn up in every culture. Every culture, you know, wrestles with questions of meaning and love and death and you know, and parenting and so on. So particularly if you're doing stories and you know, about sort of stuff that's happened, pick those kind of universal things that kind of work everywhere. That example that Joel shared of, you know, telling the story of giving a kid directions kind of home. Every culture has some version of that. So if you know it's an audience you're not familiar with, go for those kind of universal kind of themes again. And then lastly, I would say the great thing is we live in a culture that, because of digital stuff, there are more universal sort of stuff. There are differences, but things are also being flattened. So you can draw examples from media and stuff. You know, there's a good chance that if you're dealing with a younger audience, everyone's seen, you know, probably some of the same movies as everybody else if they're all in Canada, whatever. So if you can go for one of those sorts of meta-cultural things and poke fun at it, and if in doubt, make fun of politicians and lawyers, because everybody wins.
So scripted humor is actually, we've talked a lot about those ideas, but this question says, how do you actually develop a more natural form of wit? Because some of the funniest moments we've all experienced is where they're unscripted and somebody says something or there's a fast reaction. So how can that be developed, I guess, is even part of that question.
Well, let me say a couple of things, and then Joel's take would be interesting here. First thing is, look, if you're not a naturally funny person who can do those kind of witticisms off the cuff, but you are able to write stuff that script is very funny, don't feel you're second rate. You know, one of my all-time favorite comedians, one of the funniest people I think ever lived, in my view, was Douglas Adams, science fiction comedy writer who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, died many years ago now. I remember Douglas once saying, so the difference between a stand-up comedian and a comedy writer, he said, you know, something happens and a stand-up comedian can come up with something wildly funny in 5 seconds flat. He said the comedy writer will go away and think about it for 2 weeks and then come up with something 20 times funnier, but it just takes the time. And he was never afraid of that. He never did stand-up, but he wrote some of the funniest books that have ever been written. So if you are a scripted person, don't feel you're second rate. I think this comes in to find what your groove is and be comfortable in that. Don't try and be something you're not. I was expecting some great bit of wisdom.
I was just messing. I was just using a humor technique called awkward silence, you guys. I mean, if we can't lift this stuff out, I thought, how long till I go before they, okay. Yeah. Can you develop wit? I mean, as always, Andy's a legend. I love Andy. And so he's amazing at giving great advice quickly. So I was listening there and got kind of trapped in it. Sorry about that. But I would also say this, like, there's some really good, and I'm going to just suggest clean comedians out there. Like, there's some great comedians and preachers and TED Talk. Like, watching others is such a massive thing. Jay Leno, somebody ran up to Jay Leno once years ago, you know, the late night talk show host. And they said, hey, you know, I want to do what you do. How could I do that? Which is such a funny question, right? Like, he just popped up and he's a late show host or something. And he said to them this, he said, take every single speaking opportunity you can. If it's a local community thing, MC it. If it's a wedding, be the MC. If it's like, just take every opportunity. So I'm going to approach that and say, can you develop wit? Absolutely. And my book kind of goes after this notion that you can't, which is a common understanding. But, you know, Jay Leno's point is, on the one side, do everything you can to put yourself in the zone. Take every speaking opportunity. On the other side, I would say, listen to every speaker out there. If you can, not every speaker, use discernment, but if you want a good, clean comedian to watch Brian Regan. The guy has amazing physical. He has amazing timing. He nails the rule of threes. He has dry wit. So Brian Regan's a good, clean comic to suggest. So I would say those are two things, but also take the notion away from your brain that you can't learn it. The Marx Brothers, hilarious. And they came out and said, you can't learn or develop wit and humor. And so I have to kind of go after that in my book. Why? Because the truth is, when they started doing comedy, they were awful at it, but their mom took them around show to show until they got good. That's disproving the very statement that they make about you can't learn this. Hope that helps.
So the original title for this event was How to Use Humor Well Without Being Mean. So much of humor is kind of being mean or rude. And so is there a line? We've kind of alluded to this already, but then why is being rude and throwing shade so funny?
Go on, Joel, you go first on that one.
All right. Well, so why is being rude and throwing shade so funny? So, well, I can only speak from my perspective. Most comedians, when they start out in comedy, if they're cognizant of it, they're deciding to either lower someone's status or lower their own. And that's a style of comedy. Now, I would suggest for people starting out that are trying to get good at comedy, that they should start actually throwing shade on themselves. Now, that's always been my style. And, unless I'm around a friend like Andy, in which case we'll always have fun with each other, whatever we're doing, and kind of throw some digs. But it's a friendly environment, and there's no sense where I'm going to get a text from him after this saying I went too. Oh, hold on. Oh, sorry, bro. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, the point is so I think a very simple way to start is I knew it was coming. Oh, Daniel sent me one too. Okay. So self-deprecating is more looking at what are the things you do that you can produce a laugh out of. I leave the house today. I asked my wife, does this look okay? A t-shirt with a jacket? She goes, it looks okay, but that jacket's a lot smaller than the last time you wore it. And I'm like, that's weird. Oh, okay. So see, I tell that and people are like, oh, you've gained COVID weight. We can laugh, but if I make it at you, I would just say sarcasm I would use very sparingly, unless you have a situation like this where you're good friends with a guy like Andy and I are, and we can kind of have some fun sparring with each other. But in the humor realm, once you go after somebody else, you're kind of, if you will, in a sense, standing on their shoulders to make yourself look good. Whereas if you kind of just talk about, man, I did this. Has anyone done this? People relate to that kind of stuff.
I think that's good. And the other thing as well, a couple of things very quickly on that as well. We live in a culture where people are very quick to take offense and also very quick to play the victim card. And if you do attack others, you leave yourself open to, we talked earlier about social media, somebody edits some little clip of you being rude to someone in the audience and then it goes viral and you're now the comedian who just insulted the woman in the front row or something you didn't mean to. So avoid that one. The other thing about comedy, obviously, there are a lot of comedians out there who can be very rude and crude in all kinds of ways. And it's interesting, as one of my comedy heroes here in the UK, there's a comedian called Frank Skinner, very interesting chap. He used to have a very, very rude style of comedy. I mean, every other word was a swear word, very kind of, that kind of world. And then he said one day, a couple of things going on. Firstly, he kind of began to rediscover his Christian faith that he'd abandoned decades ago. But then he said, I began to realize that I was being very lazy. Because all I had to do was go into an audience of people and say something outrageously rude, F-bomb everywhere, and everyone sort of laughed nervously because nobody wanted to be the prude in the audience. And he said it made me lazy. And he set himself the task of rewriting his entire show without a swear word in it. He said I then had to be a lot funnier, and I had to work harder at being funnier. And so I think that can go on as well, that if you find yourself inclined to F-bomb or beat up on somebody, ask yourself, is it because actually I'm not actually funny and I need to work a bit harder at getting the laugh and carrying the audience kind of with me? So actually now when I see comedians who do that kind of thing, rather than get offended or upset or cross, I just sort of like to go, well, there's somebody who just needs to learn their craft a bit better, because actually the best they can do is just behave that way. And so Frank's really interesting. If you trace him over the years, the early Frank Skinner, outrageously crude and rude. Later Frank Skinner, I think much cleverer, actually.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. This is awesome. Like my cheekbones hurt right now because I've been laughing and smiling. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is medicine. It truly is. Thank you so much for your time today. Brilliant advice. I know that we've all gleaned from you these incredible nuggets and teachings. Daniel is going to come back on tell us about what the next webinar is and introduce us to new ideas. Here we go, Daniel.
Guys,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, you three. I know the boys said that it was a fake background, but we're actually giving away one of these books, and it is very much
Oh,
a real
I
background.
thought the wall was going to open when you did that. I thought the wall was going to.
So guys, thank you both so much. I was really curious to know your answer on the question about being mean, because the original title had to be changed, because every time I chatted with Andy about this webinar, he was just throwing shade at Joel. And like, it was funny, I was laughing, but
Right.
Joel wasn't on those calls. So then it's just literally mean.
Wow.
But
Wow.
still,
I feel like it's all coming
Yeah,
out
last
now. I
time
didn't
we-
know any of this.
Yeah, but last time we chatted, Daniel told me that story the other way around.
So
That's not
he's
true.
using us
I
against
think
each
he's
other.
trying to set a thing up here,
Oh,
Joel.
Wow.
Maybe just
Okay.
avoid
It does
Well,
create a bit, you know, bit of
Well,
tension helps.
I don't want to be that guy that says, hey guys, you need to leave, but both of you have events right after
Okay.
this, so
We
you're
do.
released to go. But for everyone else staying on, yeah, this is a one more chance to win this book and to hear about the how you get one-on-one coaching for free and the next webinar. So the next webinar is going to feature this author. She is the author of the book on reading well, finding the good life through great books. I've read it, I loved it, and it changed the way I read. I was reading way too fast. I love books. And yeah, she, as I read this book, she helped me slow down and read less books better. So the winner of this is Carlene Hawley. You just won this book on Reading Well by Karen Swallow Pryor. She's one of her 2 speakers next time. I'm putting in the chat right here the link, and I'll put it in the YouTube description as well for those watching later. Everyone who registers is automatically entered to win either this book. It's a beautiful hardcover, not that cheap, but excellent book. Or another book called Get to the Point, which is an incredible book on succinctness, which is precisely the title of the next webinar. It's on November 3rd. It's called Succinctly Speaking, Use Less Words to Say More. Both Sam Albury and Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor are incredible speakers and writers at using very few words, something I'm clearly working on myself. Now, if working on your professional development, your public speaking and communication is something that it matters to you, then we would love to get to coach you one-on-one. And so if you have registered for this webinar, you are entitled to a free 1 hour of coaching. And we're not going to be salesy. I promise we won't be manipulative. We're just going to first ask you a bunch of questions so we can customize our coaching for you. That's what we do. And then we'll spend the rest of the hour providing some coaching. And it's going to be helpful for you, regardless of whether or not you want to do more one-on-one coaching. We're going to help you strengthen your voice in that 1 hour of coaching. And then if that is something that is helpful for you on an ongoing basis, then you can always book in with our team and be one of our clients. Either way, it'd be so good to see you. So we hope we can see you on November 3rd at 12 o'clock Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And yeah, you can register right now. You'll get a chance to win a book if you do. Thank you so much for being here, and we would love to connect with you. So you can either wait for that invitation from me for that one-on-one coaching, or you can always email me at daniel.gilman@gmail.com. And even if you're watching the recording or found this on YouTube, we would love to provide that 1 hour coaching for you. It's our free gift to you. Guys, thanks so much again for tuning in to Legitimately Funny, how to use humor in speeches, in everyday life, and on social media.